It's a great honour for us today to host the French Defence Minister at what is actually a very difficult time for his country. So before we begin the event, I would like to say to Monsieur Le Drian that I hope he will accept on our behalf, on the behalf of Brookings and everyone here, our most sincere condolences to the victims and families of the terrible atrocity in Nice, and to all of our colleagues and friends in France who have been affected by this great tragedy. We'd like to again express our most sincere condolences at this very difficult time for you and your country. Before I introduce the Minister and we begin with the event, I want to make a few quick announcements which are quite important for all of you here. First of all, this event is going to be on the record and the Minister is going to speak in French. So for those of you who do not speak French, I want to make sure that you have headsets for the simultaneous translation. If you do not, we have them just outside of the auditorium. So I just want to make sure that everybody has what they need. And Channel 2 will have the English translation for when we begin. I also want to make sure that everyone is mindful of their cell phones for this equipment. It's quite sensitive, so if you do have a cell phone close to the equipment, if you could switch it off or put it under your seat and away from the equipment, that would be very helpful. We also have a hashtag for this event. It is #USFrance. And we'd like to welcome our C-SPAN audience who are joining us for this very important presentation by the Minister. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our French Senior Fellow, Philippe Lecourt, for his work on facilitating this and other important events on current developments in France and Europe. Minister Le Drian is here in Washington, D.C., as part of a group of defence and foreign ministers from more than 30 states. So we're here to forge a common approach with U.S. Secretary of Defence Ashton Carter on how to combat the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, which is clearly an issue of great importance to France as well as to the United States. You probably have the biographical material of Minister Le Drian in the packets that you have, but for those of you in the TV audience who clearly do not, Mr. Le Drian is originally from Brittany, as is coincidentally our colleague Philippe Lecourt, who is going to be moderating the event. He was formerly the mayor of the city of Lorient, and he's had several national-level positions in France covering defence matters before he was appointed Minister of Defence by President François Hollande in May 2012. Mr. Le Drian has also published a new book, which we're very excited about at Brookings because we like books. It's on security issues, Who is the Enemy? It's just out in English. And for those of you who would like a copy, we have one or several copies outside, again, of the auditorium. Mr. Le Drian is going to address us here from the podium, and then we will turn over to the chairs to have a discussion moderated by Philippe Lecourt, along with our colleague, Senior Fellow Mike O'Hanlon, who has published many books. Perhaps it won't be a discussion about the book, but knows a thing or two about defence issues, especially about the topics that Mr. Le Drian is here to cover today in Washington, D.C. Mr. Le Drian, it's a great honour to host you. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for the audience also for coming. Sir, the podium is yours. Merci beaucoup.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your invitation. It's with great pleasure that I'm here, that I will talk here at the Brookings Institution, in this house which has just celebrated this year its centenary. 1 century which is a difficult century in which thinking, being able to stand back away from the sometimes frightening events that we are living should help us to improve our analysis and the efficiency of our action. As you know, France has just been hit one more time in Nice on the day of the national holiday by an extremely violent terrorist action. This is the 3rd time in only 18 months. Without mentioning all the attempts that have been foiled. This is the tragic confirmation of something we were already certain of in France. France, its society model, the quality of its democratic life, its art of life, are unbearable in the eyes of those barbarians who want to hit us. As a state, this situation gives us a number of duties. The first is to guarantee the safety of our citizens. In all legitimacy, French people want increased security, but at the same time they want to preserve their mode of life, including their liberties, which are at the very basis of our social contract. Who then is this enemy who is targeting us? I would like to try with you to define specifically the shapes of the threat on us and how it is possible to face it as efficiently as possible. We have to start from a simple fact. Today, a number of terrorist groups around the major poles, Daesh, that is ISIS and Al-Qaeda, are ready to use any means to hit us, with as an objective not to beat us militarily, because this fight is lost in advance, but in order to put us in a state of stupefaction, hoping that our institutions are going to vacillate. And ISIS is a multi-shaped enemy in this way. It can be seen in three different shapes, which are closely linked. If it is not a state, legally speaking, strategically it is a proto-state, which is trying to exercise the powers of a state. This proto-state has as a companion a transnational jihadist movement, which is part, like Al-Qaeda, of a vast number of groups operating through borders and all the way to our national land. So hit ISIS or ISIL is for us also protecting our own territory. And then ISIS is an extremely dangerous ideology. They want to go back to the days of a caliphate and fashion in this way a new society. I'd like to insist on this by saying that, in my opinion, ISIS is a fully totalitarian enterprise. Why? It is based on an ideological basis which is deeply unequal, by putting human beings in hierarchical groups who are higher and lower, all the way to reintroducing slavery in its most abject way, the sexual slavery of Yazidi women. It is based on an eradication will of all the group opposed to the caliphate. It is based on a mobilization of a number of society, financial and human resources on the service of a permanent fight against the rest of the world, and it is based on a very strict police control of population under an extreme violence, like we can see in the executions performed in the territories dominated by ISIS. This multiform shape calls for a number of reactions from us. Military, we have to destroy this jihadist proto-state. At the level of police and the judiciary, we have to protect our citizens on the national territory, and the French army is contributing to this today because the adversary itself and this kind of terrorism has been militarized. At the economical level, drawing out the recruiting by ISIS of jihadists will go through the modification of its financial resources. And lastly, at the political and ideological level, we have to use every means available to fight against the influence of ISIS. Our efforts in particular should go on the cyber field to fight against what I would call the virtual caliphate, which could be reinvested as the physical caliphate is moving backwards in Syria and Iraq. The threat represented by ISIS is new in its in the way it is shaped, but not by its nature. Pretending dominating a territory and creating a proto-state managing a population already existed in Mali in 2012 with ACME, and using terror against civilians in Baghdad as in Paris, in Istanbul as in Brussels, with the will to make the societies resisting more fragile is something not new. And the American people is better placed than most others to know this. Our action should adapt to the fact that the threat is continuous. They're targeting us far from our borders just as well as at the heart of our lives. Our action should be external and internal at the same time. We must call on a number of instruments, starting from our armed forces deployed in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Sahel, all the way to the intelligence services, police, and justice, without forgetting the capacity of civil security to face the enemy when we are attacked. And this is the field I have most interest in. Allow me to center what I'm going to say on the military side of action led by France against these terrorist armed group threatening us. France is not a country that goes to war for pleasure, but it can recognize the fact that sometimes wars are imposed on it. It was the case in 2021 in Afghanistan when we intervened out of solidarity with our American allies, and this is the case today as well. In 2003, we were brave enough to say that the Iraq war should not be led. There were other ways, and risks were immense. Don't see this to insist on the fact that we were right. That's not what I want to say. I simply observe that when France goes to war, it's because it has very well-founded reason to do so. In Syria and Iraq, France is not fighting terrorism in general. We are fighting a war against terrorism, not against terrorism, but against well-identified enemies, which have led acts of war or destabilization at the very heart of our territory, and with which no negotiation is obviously possible. These groups should be destroyed. I want to repeat here that the idea according to which we could buy our tranquility by fighting only ISIS is meaningless. ISIS program is without any ambiguity. It's the world domination by the caliphate. If we let him strengthen its empire on the Middle East, it would have even more resources, more fighters, more capacity to plan to hit us, just as it did last November when an armed commando was projected at the very heart of Paris according to a very precise plan that had been elaborated for a long time. The French contribution to this campaign of the coalition, which justify my presence here in Washington today, is significant. We are training in Baghdad the members of an elite corps against terrorism. We are training the Iraqi army. We work hand in hand with the Peshmergas. Our aircraft are mobilized, and since September 2014 hit the coalition and its targets almost daily. These actions made it possible to, with the whole of the coalition under the leadership of the United States, all this has allowed us to reach extremely important results. I'm thinking of liberation of Fallujah, which is a major symbol, as it was the first major city controlled by ISIS when it started acting. I am thinking of the imminent loss of Manbij, which will cut ISIS from its last access to the external world. I'm thinking of the taking of Qaira, which make it possible now to very concretely planify our move towards Mosul, one of the major centers of the terrorist organization. All this makes it possible for us to see the moment, very soon I hope, when ISIS will have lost its territorial domination in the Levant or Near East. This will reduce its capacity to act against us and to planify complex attacks over the long term. We know that, as I've already mentioned, the terrorist attack of November 2013 were planned and designed and prepared from Syria, and in particular from Manbij and Raqqa, with the projection of commandos into France through the migration flows and the transfer of resources from Middle East to Europe. But this territorial loss should also allow us to hit directly the propaganda machine of ISIS. This machine, this incubator, which makes it possible to mobilize people who have weak minds or are fanatics, who are incited, as in the case of Nice, to take alone the initiative of terrorist actions. I would like to mention here that the use of vehicles as a weapon in a rudimentary and violent way with the only objective to kill is a mode of operation which had been proposed by Al-Qaeda already in 2010 and by ISIS in 2015. What they want to do is terrorize, even in a totally disorganized way. What matters is to hit at symbols, the French Republic and the idea of liberty, closely linked to the national holiday of the 14th of July, Jews, whose integration into the French Republic was the one that had been the earliest in the Western world in 1789, the youth at the Bataclan, or journalists and press cartoonists, as was the case in the attack against Charlie Hebdo. So we must destroy the territorial empire of ISIS, because this is the heart of this organization, and it's an objective that we are about to reach with the coalition. The terrorist organization has lost about 40% of its territory in Iraq and 20% in Syria. Its resources are much reduced now, in particular in terms of oil, and the flow of fighters helping it is progressively being reduced. At the same time, our action in the field allow us to gather an important quantity of intelligence about ISIS. The fact that Daesh has left Manbij, where a number of French citizens were in transit, made it possible to get information which will be useful to protect the national territory from the threat that the French fighters or foreigners are for us. Today, about 680 French were members of ISIS in... today, 680 French are members of ISIS. 187 would have been killed, and about 200 came back to France. But they keep hitting us in France, in Belgium, in the U.S., elsewhere. It is our duty to reduce as quickly as possible this phase of backing up in order to hit it with decisive strikes in order to disorganize it in a definitive way. This is the reason why in the present phase of the operation in the Near East, the President of the Republic has announced an increase of our military contribution. The Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier will be deployed again, and the support that we bring to the Iraqi forces and to the Peshmerga forces will be increased generally in Iraq. Faced with the size of this challenge, we must have a common answer, and the United States, in this perspective, are more than ever indispensable. The U.S. and France are the two major targets designated by the propaganda of the jihadist groups. The kind of threat on us remains very similar, since the individual responsible for mass killing, as in Nice or Orlando, to the foreign fighters who are an extremely dangerous threat. Fight against ISIS, against its metastasis, and in a general way against Islamist terrorist groups is a fight that both France and the U.S., in which they work together with their allies on all the theaters. This is true in Syria, this is true in Iraq, and I must say that the excellent quality of the work relationship I have developed with Ashton Carter in the last few months in very difficult times for France has allowed us to have a shared strategy for the Middle East. It is true as well in Africa, where today France is fighting against Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and other jihadist groups with the help of the United States in terms of intelligence, transport, supplies, etc. These are extremely precious elements, which are one of the conditions of our success, and France also benefits from the support of the United States, thanks to the vote of a special part of your law on finance, the section 1207 of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2016, which allows your country to bring an operational aid and financial aid to states fighting against terrorism with the same strategic objective. I see in this bipartisan support that received this recognition of the efficiency of the French forces another sign of how close our links are. And this closeness, and I'm seeing this here, made it possible to bring our military relation to an unprecedented level in our recent history. And of course, I'm extremely happy about this. The fact that the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier headed at the beginning of 2016 the Task Force 50 is also an extremely strong sign about the high level of interoperability between the French and American forces and of the confidence on us. It was the first time that a foreign admiral was in charge of a task force, including American vessels. In the same order of ideas, in the morning of this tragic 14th of July, during the military parade of the 14th of July, the fact that the Champs-Élysées were overflown by an American plane, a Hercules C-130J, followed by two French Caracal helicopters, was very important for me because it symbolized an operational cooperation which is extremely efficient in the Sahel. Our cooperation is also extremely strong in terms of operational intelligence exchange within the special instructions given by Ashton Carter to the intelligence agencies under his responsibility, which led to shared instructions which I have given to my own services and to the French military command. This proximity, which has been verified so many times, allows us to work on difficult files like this hand in hand. In Libya, the fact that ISIS has been pushed back, in particular in Sirte, is a very positive signal. We support the national government, which must be at the head of an inclusive security system. This effort must rely on the constitution of a real Libyan army, an army which is not putting together a number of militia, but which should represent the diversity of the country. This effort must be strengthened by the effective application of embargo on armament to Libya for ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which has been recently authorized by the Security Council with a very strong and robust mandate given to this mission called Sophia. France contributes to this mission with naval means to guarantee the control of the suspect vessels which feed the terrorist groups in Libya with weapons. Further, to our fight against jihadist terrorist groups, this very close relation between France and the U.S. should also allow us to face the threat of force and other challenges which are emerging in terms of security. I think, for example, of the attitude which should be ours faced with Russia. Like the President of the Republic said in Warsaw, France and NATO are in a strictly defensive posture. We do not threat anyone. But however, we have to guarantee the safety of the member states of the alliance, in particular the most fragile of those members. And this is the reason why France will take part, starting in 2017, to the advanced presence of Allied troops in the east, and more specifically in Estonia. But among these challenges, security challenges, I also have in mind the Thousand China Sea, where we maintain that it is necessary to contribute to reduce tensions, guided only by international law, which guarantees freedom of circulation in the maritime space and constitute a stabilizing element of the international order. If we let this right be challenged somewhere, it will be challenged everywhere. There is another aspect, more political, this one, which comes to mind, the way that we will have to go along with the Brexit in the field of defense. It is not up to me as Minister of Defense to give my opinion on the will of the British people, or to comment internal political decisions, or to make suppositions on what diplomatic mechanism should be used. But I cannot disinterest my attention from the geostrategical impacts that this major decision will have on the strategic balances and the future of Europe. And I hope that we'll be able to find modalities for this separation which will preserve stability of the European continent. There are some cause for concern in here that we have to look at squarely. There are three kinds, I think. First of all, we have to avoid that the United Kingdom would fall back into itself, and it might be totally absorbed by negotiation on separation. It would not be for us in the interest of the British, with whom we have excellent relations in terms of defense, to turn its back upon Europe or the world. That's what we have told them. That's what we have written in the British press, at least. That's what I have done, and that's what we'll keep telling them. In the same way, we think that it is not anymore in the interest of Europe to look at this separation with revenge in mind. Secondly, we have to avoid disuniting Europeans within the European Union, because this would have a negative impact on this cohesion and unity of NATO, which we have just reaffirmed in Warsaw. Thirdly, we have to avoid that Europe would lose its position as a major actor of security, as a complement to the American power. Further than budgetary aspects, which are obvious, the exit from the EU of the only other nuclear and expeditionary power could reinforce the position of countries which do not wish to see Europeans take charge of their own security. This is a major subject for personal preoccupation for me. And the state of mind in Berlin, as shown by the most recent German White Book, is an excellent thing. And I will continue to work closely with Ursula von der Leyen to propose to Europeans modalities to reinforce the defense of Europe, in the interest also of Americans, which regularly call for a better sharing of the weight of defending the two sides of the Atlantic. But I remain confident. I'm confident because we still see the signs of a British will to keep working with the rest of Europe and to maintain a strong presence on the international scene. I'm confident because I see the capacity for mobilization of France and of Europeans. First of all, bilaterally, France will continue to have with the United Kingdom an extremely rich defense relationship. International context calls for pragmatism. The United Kingdom remains our partner in Europe, which has the will and the capacity to intervene in the world. It remains a nuclear power in a very uncertain world. The strength of our defense relation, strengthened by the treaties of Lancaster House, and the strength of our links will allow us to wait against all temptation of strategic stepping back. Paris and London have recently validated the concept of a common joint expeditionary force, which should be able to be the prime force if such a situation called for it. Furthermore, we worked to relaunch the European project within the redefinition of the security policy, the PSDC. Brexit is a symptom. We have to analyze the causes for it and give a sense to the European project for our citizens. Security is a major preoccupation for our society, and Europe will be a major actor of their own security, or it will fail. This is a file on which we are working a lot at the time. In a troubled strategic and political context, ladies and gentlemen, I am convinced that the French-American friendship is stronger and more important than ever. It is shown in the fight that we are waging together now against the jihadist terrorist groups which are threatening us. It also gives us a special responsibility to go along with the geopolitical changes that is Brexit. And further than the interest that we are sharing at the moment, the American-French relation is very deep because its roots go back into the past, more than 2 centuries of strong solidarity when we are about to commemorate, in particular, the century of the coming into war of your nation in the First World War, next to ours. This friendship is a real story. And when there are people on both sides of the Atlantic which are calling for closing up onto oneself, this is an element we should never forget. For all these reasons, in this electoral year for both our countries, I wish that the Franco-American friendship grows even stronger and that our defense relationship keeps deepening. We all have, including yourself, we all have a major role to play in this. Thank you very much for your attention.